So I've got the glue drying on the seat blank. All the pieces are glued up together. And I made up some blanks for the legs. They're just 2" by 2" cut square, milled up the same way as I did for the seat blank pieces. And this is my template I used on the other two chairs. The next two chairs that I make are going to have to fit my wife. I am 6'3". My wife is 5'1", if you believe her. I think she might brag herself up an inch or so. So this leg I'm going to have to shorten by about 1.5 inches, but I can still use this same thing, and I'll show you how at the lathe. So what you got to do is take your blank and find the centers on it. I'll show you how to do that. So you want to go from corner to corner in both directions, and that'll give you your center point. When it's something small, you can use a chisel to do it, or sometimes a plane blade. I've got these spare set of joiner knives. They're good and straight, and they're tough, so they won't bend. And you just lay them across from corner to corner and give it a pound with your beater. Going that way. And going that way. You got a nice X, and from there you can take an awl and just find your center and define it a little bit better, so you can find that with the driver and the live center on your lathe. So you remove the driver from your lathe motor and stick it right in the center that you found. Give it a good whack. I used to just use the pressure from this to slowly squeeze it in. I don't think that's good, because you might want to put a bending moment on your work. So you're better off just giving it a good tamp, and you shouldn't have any problems from there. A lot of lathes come with a doohickey like this one, that when you turn it 90 degrees, it'll lock your driver. And that's going to come in handy for the next thing we're going to do. When you're turning square stock on your lathe, when you first put that roughing chisel to it, as it's slowly turning, it's a real jarring thing. You're peeling off big splinters and it's beating you and vibrating you. And the way you can minimize that is to take your draw knife and just round those corners off. You can, as soon as we're going to get this thing round, just try to imagine how far down you can take it according to that. Probably about time I sharpen this thing. I'm not good at sharpening things, so I tend to put it off as long as I can. But this bit of work right here makes your life easier when you go to turn it around at the very beginning. And you turn it 90 degrees and have another go. Beat this for all 4 sides. You do this stuff from rough stock, and you got to get used to having lots and lots of chips to get rid of. Doesn't take long before you got a big pile on your floor. I heat my wood shop with a wood stove. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The wood stove takes up one whole corner of the shop, and there's safety things you got to think about. But it's a great way of getting rid of scrap wood and shavings and sawdust. And you know, I'm here in Western New York. It gets pretty cold in the winter, and guilt-free I can crank it up to 85 degrees in here, work around with a t-shirt on. It's a wonderful thing. So it's October now. In the coming months I'm really going to appreciate that wood stove. So we're all squared away and we're getting ready to do the rough turning to make this thing round. Before we get started, I feel like I ought to give you the Norm Abrams safety speech. You're better off removing jewelry from this hand. I usually put it on my wedding ring on this hand because this hand is safely back here away from the spinning stock. You don't want anything getting caught between the stock and this, or getting wrapped around and degloving your hand. And that's a word I just can't stand, degloving. I've spoken to some emergency room people who describe degloving someone's hand, and that's just an awful word. So you use your lathe on its slowest speed to begin with, and you speed it up as you go. Highly recommend a face shield. I have had stock jump off of the lathe before, and you don't know which way it's going to go flying, and this face shield stopped it once for me already, and that's all it took to sell me on the idea. So, and it's pretty comfortable. I mean, I wear it and I'm barely aware that it's even on. So you take your roughing gouge, and the way you serve it is to place it on the tool rest, and if you kind of lay it over the top of it as it's spinning, it won't cut, and you slowly bring it back, and then eventually it's going to start taking chips. And you don't want to take too deep a bite. You just get to where it's cutting well and work your way across, back and forth. Work it until it's round, and then advance the tool rest and work on this side. If you're going to do a lot of turning, you want your lathes to be, your chisels to be as sharp as you can get them. I have a lot of jigs and equipment and stones and things to sharpen my various tools. All of them are just crutches because I'm just not good at sharpening things, so I'll take all the technology I can get. Trying to do this stuff with a dull chisel is just at best impossible and at worst dangerous. So sharpen your tools every time. When your tools are sharp and your speed is right, it cuts good, and all I can say is it feels good as you're working. You know, it just feels in your hands like you're doing a good job. When your tools are dull or the stock is off balance or something, you'll tend to know it in your hands. Your hands will tell you that. I really find working on the lathe satisfying. Years ago, I took a class in pottery. It's something I always wanted to try. Someone who's good at it makes it look easy, and just kind of a neat thing. I tried it and I found I wasn't good at it. I also didn't like the feel of the clay. The clay was cold and slimy and gross. When I'm working on the lathe, I feel like I'm getting the frame of mind that I was seeking to get from working on a potter's wheel. That's the only way I can describe it. When your tools are sharp and you know what you're doing and you're moving right along, it's just a real serene peaceful feeling you get on this thing. I just wanted to point this out. When you're first rounding it off, you can judge how well you centered your stock by, you see how the chisel took off here, and here's flat, and then it's chiseled here, and then it's flat. And when you first start cutting, all these flat areas should be pretty near equal to each other. If you're off center for whatever reason, you'll have a big flat on this and it'll be nearly round on the other, and that tells you that you're not quite centered properly. One thing that can cause that is if your stock warps at all, you'll wind up cutting more on one side than the other in the middle, but not at the ends. And this is green lumber that I'm using, so you should do your turning pretty soon after you've milled up your stock to spec. I made the mistake of milling it up and setting it aside for the summer before I could get back to it, and I actually had turned them around and then set them aside, and when I brought them back I found that they had bowed to the point where I couldn't use them anymore. On a Windsor chair, you're compensating for slight errors and mistakes as you go, so your angles and everything don't have to be perfect. Like, you can take a slightly warped brace or something and use it, but turning a slightly warped brace, forget it. You're better off just cutting another piece and trying. So yeah, mill up your stock and turn it on the lathe right away.